These tweets, there were a number of them, and they were point blank in terms of the president's feelings about Harley-Davidson making this decision to curb some U.S. production, shift it overseas as a result of these EU tariffs. One of the first tweets from the president this morning: when I had Harley-Davidson officials over to the White House, I chided them about tariffs in other countries like India being too high. Companies are now coming back to America. Harley must know that they won't be able to sell back into the U.S. without paying a big tax. Another tweet from the president: a Harley-Davidson should never be built in another country. Never. Their employees and customers are already very angry at them. If they move, watch. It will be the beginning of the end. They surrendered. They quit. The aura will be gone, and they will be taxed like never before. Little unclear what he means by that last sentence about them being taxed like never before, whether he's talking about other countries or about here in the United States. But the relationship between the president, the Trump administration, and Harley-Davidson, really almost from day one when he took office, he was lauding them as an example of a company that builds in America, employs in America, and he said repeatedly, this is a strong company. Well, not strong enough that it doesn't need to shift some production overseas. The company says it's making this move because these EU tariffs will have an annual impact of between $90 and $100 million for the company, because it's adding on to the price of the Harley-Davidson that's sold in Europe. If it's shipped from the U.S. and it's sold over there, guys, it's going to add another $2,200 onto the cost of a Harley-Davidson, which, by the way, the company has said they're not passing that on to customers and to retailers. They will eat that cost until they can figure out some way of supplying that market from other locations outside of the United States. Guys, back to you.
You know, Phil, how does this shift the CEO calculus on how to deal with the president and his tweets? I mean, surely the president understands that not every Harley-Davidson buyer is in the USA, and that this company has got to stay in business, that it's not moving all of its manufacturing overseas. What do you do if you're a CEO, not just of Harley, but of any car manufacturer that has got to operate globally?
Well, look, John, the first thing you notice, John, you rarely hear from CEOs about the Trump administration. It's a no-win situation from their perspective. Look at Mark Fields at Ford. Separate from all the issues that were going on at Ford and why he was ultimately replaced as CEO, he was in the middle of a Trump tweet storm when Trump first got into office, and he attacked them for deciding to build in Mexico and then ultimately changed their minds because of the pressure from the Trump administration. I've talked with Mark Fields a number of times, and he made it clear, you really are in a no-win situation. You're trying to do what's best for your company, but if it runs counter to what the White House and President Trump think, you are going to get blasted. And you can't really respond. You can't come back on Twitter and say, yeah, you know what, Mr. President, this is why we did this, because then it's a vicious spiral downhill.
Phil, you're making a key point by bringing up the automakers, and that's the fact that when you look across the industrial landscape, the manufacturing landscape, a lot of these companies, most notably the automakers, have already diversified their production into many different regions of the world and have been doing so for years. And so the argument could be made that Harley has been somewhat slower to do that and is just sort of getting into it after the fact, on the heels of other companies.
And as you know, Morgan, from covering this company, they needed to make this decision because the growth markets are Asia and Europe. U.S. is sort of a, you know, it's not a huge growth opportunity in the future. They're strong here. This is their biggest market. But in terms of growing sales, it's Asia and in Europe. And if Harley is going to do that, it needed to diversify. Now, the argument that you will hear from the president is, oh, they're using the tariffs as cover for making a business choice that they should have made or probably had to make a long time ago. That said, there is this discussion about if you are Harley-Davidson, you need to diversify, and you needed to move that manufacturing footprint around the world.
Yeah. Well, the whole point of turning to Europe was to offset declining ridership here in the States, Phil. And I think it's curious, after Daimler's warning on the year, now Haag, it's going to be curious to see this quarter if any other big manufacturers announce similar changes or at least guidance.
And I think July 6th is the date to watch. If you see China come in with those tariffs, and then shortly after that, you see more retaliatory tariffs from the EU, watch the auto manufacturers, watch the suppliers, because they're going to get whipsawed by this. Whether they're building here in the U.S., building in Asia, or building in Europe, in some fashion, they will be hit, and I bet that's when we hear about it.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.